Welcome back to PWCI This Week. I'm the mad conservative crime fighter, and as the shutdown continues, at least in Illinois, more on that in a bit, I shall call this episode Crimey Coast to Coast. The views expressed by a mad conservative are solely my own and do not reflect the views of family, friends, co-workers, or any organization. We have an interview to bring to you in the second half of the program, but first, what a difference a week makes. As if the COVID-19 stuff weren't bad enough, now we have race riots all over the country, and guess what? Large gathering bans are mostly no longer a concern to politicians. Yes, that's right. All the whining and complaining about the protests over the COVID-19 shutdowns have suddenly gone away. And why? Because the topic is different, and the folks protesting are whom the left-wing campaigns seek votes from. Those to give them more power beyond the power they wielded during the lockdowns. But they aren't freaking out over greater spread of COVID-19 as a result. What hypocrites they are. So let's start off with what needs to be said from the outset. A man should never have been choked out the way he was by that Minneapolis police officer. Everyone should have learned after the incident in New York where Eric Garner lost his life so George Floyd would not have lost his over petty crime. The bad police officer who choked him out probably should have been fired a long time ago for prior incidents. They took too long in arresting him. He'll be tried for second-degree murder and those who aided and abetted it. However, do not be reckless with the prosecution because what was thought to be an open and shut cases a number of times in the past were botched, leading to defendants being acquitted and more trouble erupts. Get your case rock solid before going to court and don't be careless. One person who could have prosecuted him years ago, former presidential candidate Amy Klobuchar, probably cost herself the VP slot when she chose not to, among other officers accused of killing civilians over a span of years. The response to this incident has gone well beyond protesting, leading to loss of life. Several people have been injured or killed, including African Americans such as retired police captain David Dorn of St. Louis defending a friend's business, Natalia Kelly of Davenport, Iowa, who was killed in a random shooting after participating in a protest believed to come from another protester's gun. These are just two examples. The message of stopping police brutality has been lost to bad actors among the protesters committing crimes of opportunity and agitating the situation by delivering pallets of bricks and bombs in places to create as much chaos as possible. Businesses barely hanging on from the COVID-19 shutdowns were finished off with the vandalism and looting. Justice needs to be served, going in all directions, the people who killed George Floyd and all the agitators engaging in domestic terrorism. The governor of the state, the mayors of Chicago and St. Louis have failed miserably in how they've dealt with this. And they should absolutely pay a price for their incompetence and horribly misguided priorities. It's so bad that the president has threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act and send in the military to restore order. I'd be tickled to death if this accelerates the recall petition drive going on right now and we get the opportunity to kick Pritzker out of office and send him back to his hideouts in Wisconsin or Florida before he's up for re-election in 2022. But this whole disaster of the past few months ought to destroy any chance of him getting a second term, and whoever runs against him, pound him daily without any let-up with how badly he's handled this crisis. The Illinois GOP better find someone that's definitely not a left-wing rhino type that conservatives won't have anything to do with, because that's what's gotten them in the minority position they've been in since George Ryan was governor. I'm old enough to remember everything starting from Rodney King when I was in college to what's going on now. Now, having a discussion of race relations in America is too complex a topic for me to handle, and I would need a round table of people who can articulate it all. In a span of 30 minutes I have per week on Access 4 and UPTV 6, there's too much to cram in. I would best leave it to the talk radio shows where many of you are tuning into for this. Now, I need to backtrack a bit to around Memorial Day weekend. This photo freaked out every Karen and Daryl in the country over in neighboring Missouri. They're going into orbit screaming public health catastrophe, flooding the hospitals with infected patients. Only one person out of that crowd in Lake Ozark, Missouri tested positive for COVID-19 who may have had it before even showing up there. No new cases have been reported since. And someone got all triggered at me when I opened the YouTube showing of this program last week saying my health hasn't gone bad and went false flagging the episode. Well, another week has passed. I've been at my workplace almost daily. Still no change in my health. You Karens and Daryls, take a good look at this photograph and listen. You will not put the genie back in the bottle. We are done with your crap. Get used to this. It's over. Suck it. We are taking back what we've lost from all these lockdowns. You still afraid of getting sick? Go to your remote farmhouse and lock yourselves in the dungeons for the next 10 years. You will not be missed. The CDC has lowered the mortality rate down to 0.3%. A couple months ago, there were people claiming it was between 5 and 10%. The lockdowns don't seem so justified now, does it? By the way, the seasonal flu is still active in the world, as the death count has surpassed 210,000 as of last Sunday. As for fearless leader, the governor has been showered with more lawsuits, and one of them was in front of a Supreme Court judge over banning church services because public gatherings encourage the spread of COVID-19, he said. Knowing he was about to lose that fight in the hours before the deadline to respond, he capitulated. He removed the restrictions and labeled them guidelines instead. Why the wuss out? This actually would preserve his ability to reimpose the restrictions later if he happens to change his mind. And it worked, because Justice Brett Kavanaugh dismissed the emergency injunction request without prejudice, but if the governor reinstated them later, then it's game on again. I actually believe Kavanaugh should have made a ruling, especially when many citizens of Chicago had their cars towed and were charged $1,000 apiece by this loser of a mayor, Lori Beetlejuice Lightfoot. This loon had cars in the early morning hours for a 1 square mile block, including residents who had their every right to park there in front of their living quarters. This goof got elected because she was running against the soda tax queen, Toni Prickfinkel, who handed out cash bonuses to her political cronies with the money's raised that she claimed was for funding law enforcement. Alas, Lightfoot was an unknown quantity other than being the first lesbian mayor of a major city. But now there's riots in that city, and her fears of COVID-19 spiking worse than it already is when it's already a hotspot for the virus has suddenly gone away. Those Chicago Public Health Department officials are urging protesters to self-quarantine for 2 weeks. Yeah, good luck with that. Lightfoot demonstrated how utterly clueless, stupid, and incompetent she is as she traded F-bombs with city aldermen on how to deal with the unrest, and rejected evidence of people traveling in from out of state to deliberately cause trouble instead of merely protest. Maybe she would have cared more had they advertised a giant house party in the trouble zone, since Beetlejuice threatened to aggressively throw people in jail if you even so talk about it. When you care more about stopping house parties over violence, we got a problem. And she and the governor think they can block the president from invoking the Insurrection Act, which is federal law, but you know they keep invoking powers they don't legally have. Meanwhile, in St. Louis, the idiot circuit attorney down there, Kim Gardner, released 36 people arrested for rioting and looting without charges being filed against them. This after 4 police officers were shot downtown in the city. Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt slammed the move. What Kim Gardner did was demonstrate there are no consequences for this kind of criminal activity. While 7 were rearrested and charged, Gardner should be forced to resign and have her law license stripped, as her explanation for her actions is unacceptable. What's so ironic, politicians were throwing massive hissy fits over protests against COVID-19 lockdowns. Those protests were mostly peaceful, even when militia members showed up at the Michigan Capitol armed with rifles. They didn't like their power being challenged. Nurse Ratched, the governor of Michigan, participated, breaking all of her own rules. Protesting is now okay with them because they believe it will help them acquire more power. Social distancing has most definitely ended in the wake of rioting, and some of the hardcore lockdown leaders seem comfortable with large crowds rampaging the streets. We shall find out one thing by the time this program airs in regards to large gatherings. Either the politicians, in their encouragement of protesting and rioting, caused a major spike in COVID-19 infections, or no spike happens at all, proving the lockdowns no longer need to continue. It is a win-win situation for the reopened rallies. If there is a spike, we're responsible nearly 1,300 so-called public health professionals who signed a letter saying not to use COVID-19 as a reason to stop the protests, making a ridiculous distinction as to why anti-racism protests were good, but anti-lockdown protests were bad. We do not condemn these anti-racism gatherings as risky for COVID-19 transmission. We support them as vital to the national public health and to the threatened health specifically of black people in the United States. This should not be confused with a permissive stance on all gatherings, particularly protests against stay-home orders. Those actions not only impose public health interventions, but are also rooted in white nationalism and run contrary to respect for black lives. You just destroyed every ounce of credibility you preaching at us to stay home and stop the spread of the virus in favor of political correctness. No one should ever listen to you guys again when you scream social distancing, no large gatherings, keep non-essential businesses closed. By signing this letter, you are encouraging the spread of COVID-19. All you are a bunch of phony, hypocritical quacks and disgraces to your profession. You make me sick. Some further ironies. Those mandatory mask requirements are making it harder to identify those committing crimes in these riots. But you leave DNA in these masks, which helped nab a child molester in California. But another twist, contact tracing that was going to be used to track the COVID-19 infected is being used to identify who these protesters are linked to as a crime-fighting tool. And finally, the Karens and the Daryls are participating in these protests. Yeah, most are wearing face masks, but even so, they've been complaining so loudly about large gatherings for so long they've shown themselves to be hypocrites. Another irony, the Lincoln Memorial was vandalized by rioters, yet Abe Lincoln was the man who ended slavery. That's gratitude for you. As someone who is a crime fighter, the recent push to defund and do away with law enforcement as the answer to prevent another George Floyd, Eric Garner incident is insanity. But if that's what they want, I'll snap my fingers and say there's no law enforcement. Now here's what happens next. Calls for help come in. Hey, an intruder's in my house. Sorry, you're on your own. Hey, I'm being robbed. Sorry, you're on your own. Hey, my son was shot. Sorry, you're on your own. Hey, my daughter was sexually assaulted. Sorry, you're on your own. Deal with it yourself. Then vigilantism fills the void and it's back to the Wild Wild West. No wonder gun sales are skyrocketing with the foolish, idiotic decisions local elected leaders are making. Going on blind rage, hyper-emotion, and not thinking anything through will lead to extremely high levels of unintended consequences. This is why the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, exists. But here's the suggestion to the defund the police crowd. Put a sign in your own yard that says, "We'll refuse all law enforcement assistance if I am a victim of a crime." Let everyone know how that works out for you. Police protection should also be pulled from all elected leaders too. Let them fend for themselves. It will be an extremely painful lesson for these left-wing loons who can only learn the hard way. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announced attendance at movie theaters and sports events can occur at 50% capacity, which opens the door to allow WWE and AEW to have live fans again. As large public gathering restrictions ease in neighboring states, wrestling shows are starting up again, as you can see in this shot from Insane Championship Wrestling last Friday. So what should everyone expect going in? Coming up next, we'll have the promoter of Brew City Wrestling on the program to talk about it after the break. As Wisconsin is no longer under stay-at-home restrictions due to the state Supreme Court ruling, promoters have made moves to get the independent wrestling scene back up and running. One of those promotions will be running on June the 20th in Waukesha at the Elks Lodge. Back in the 1980s, you probably would have recognized this gentleman in the AWA or WWE as one of the guys who were on the receiving end of a beating by many of the prominent names of that era. Nowadays, you'll find him promoting his events under the Brew City Wrestling banner and the Thumper's Den Wrestling School in Milwaukee. He is Frankie DeFalco. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Steve. It's pronounced Waukesha.
I'm doing well just to pronounce Oconomowoc correctly.
It's Indian. What are you going to do?
Yes.
A bunch of cities are named, by the Indians here, so... Anyway.
Well, it's one of the few places that no longer has a statewide large gathering ban. It's up to county health departments to decide whether one is needed due to conditions on the ground, I believe. How did you assess the situation to determine it was safe enough to run an indoor event with the COVID-19 virus still an issue in a number of places?
Yeah, we got very lucky. I've had to cancel 7 shows. 2 of them house shows, 5 of them fairs and festivals. The most recent one being Wisconsin State Fair. We would have been going on our 15th year if it wasn't canceled for August 2nd, but it is what it is, unfortunately, and now we are canceled. So, yeah. But, yeah, the Wisconsin Health Department, Waukesha County is different. Not like Milwaukee, unfortunately, but when I sent out my emails for people who've already bought tickets for the June 20th show, I let them know they have the choice of either putting their seats together or separated, and they're all responding is that they want them together, so that's good.
So what changes are you making to minimize the health of fans, or minimize risk to the health of fans, and do you have any requirements of them coming to the event, like spacing them apart? And you just mentioned, you gave them an option. Right. Will they have to wear face masks?
That's optional for them as well, too, but I am providing hand sanitizer and masks for the fans that come in on June 20th. And I have a friend of mine who's a nurse, and she's going to be scanning foreheads and ears for temperatures. So if anybody's over 99, I think she said 99 something, but they won't be able to get in, unfortunately.
Triple digits. We'll just round it up to 100.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, the talent's health, apart from the bumping around the ring, has to be taken into account, being in contact with a large number of people as well. What all will they be doing differently?
I've got the same thing. I'm asking them all that if they've been anybody who's been in contact with any work personnel or friends or family that have had the virus within the last 2 weeks, if they have, they're off the show. It's that simple. And plus, when the fans come in, I have my lawyer drawing up some paperwork that notes that if they've also been in contact, if they've had temperature within the last 2 weeks or anything like that, and then they have to sign it. And if hopefully they all say no, then they'll be able to come in the show. I have to protect my assets as well, too, along with the Elks Lodge. So my lawyer is drawing up paperwork for that. So I have pretty much everything covered with the temperature and the masks and the hand sanitizers as well, too, to make sure everything's going to be okay.
Now, from what polling numbers that are out there, Americans are widely split as to when it's safe to attend public gatherings or sporting events, but percentages are split 40-40 on the public going to events now versus waiting for a vaccine. What do you believe attendance will be like to your event compared to what it was last year before the virus appeared?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I average anywhere between 200 and 300 people every month. So ringside's already sold out at 68. I easily could get 80, but I don't want to. So I wouldn't be surprised if over 200 people show up again on June 20th. The people, the fans and people in general are chomping at the bit to see wrestling, and I'm one of the first ones in the state to do it on June 20th.
Now, have you had any pushback to having events again from public health officials, or have you had any so-called social distance warriors like the Karens and the Daryls question your sanity like I have had when I dared go across the border to get a haircut?
No, not at all. The county executive for Waukesha County is a friend of mine, and he's totally on board too. He would have told me that if there was an issue, don't run. But he said that, he has I have his blessings to have a great show, and that's where we're going to go with it.
You kind of already answered this question. Mentioned several shows were wiped out when the shutdown was imposed. How disruptive was this to long-term booking plans, or can you get back on track by simply backing up the calendar?
That's what I did. I backed it up a couple months, and we're going to go forward with several of the storylines that we have going, and they're all ready to go. Like I said, the wrestlers are chomping at the bit also. The students are ready to go, so it's going to be a full go come June 20th.
Well, it may be a stretch that downstate Illinois fans make the 5-6 hour commute up just to see this event, unless they're up there for the whole weekend already. Who all will be appearing?
One match that we have going on is going to be one of the hottest feuds between Dysfunction, who is the Brew City Wrestling Heavyweight Champion, and the Midwest Slayer, Stacy Shadows, as they take on the Ace of Diamonds, Maverick Boone, and his cohort, Ethan Matthews. I'm also going to be crowning a new BCW Women's Champion on June 20th at the Elks Lodge, and have 4 of the top women that I believe were going to be competing. One match is going to be Sky Blue, who is from Illinois. She'll be taking on a talent from Florida by the name of Rocky Radley, who is a student of Gangrel School. And then in the other one would be Paloma Star, another Illinois product, taking on Casey Carlisle from Virginia. So it's going to be a very competitive 2 matches for the new BCW Women's Championship.
One of your proteges, Sierra, have you and Sierra settled your differences and made up after her corruption by Dysfunction?
Well, I brought Sierra into this business. I've already taken her out of business once before. And, I do have a soft spot in my heart for that kid. I've helped her and her family out when times were tough. And she's gone through a lot within the last year, going to school to become a nurse, wrestling every weekend, and a job. So juggling all 3 kind of broke her down a little bit, and she took about a half a year off, and now she's getting back into the business again. So I wish her nothing but great success.
Now, the long, lengthy layoff, I kind of think that a lot of wrestlers have taken advantage of this time to completely heal up. But ring rust is a problem, so how are you coping with that situation or balancing that out?
I opened up the Thumper's Den Wrestling Academy approximately back in early May for 1 night a week, just for my students, just to get things going, because some of my students are on shows for other companies, including myself. So I've got them going, and now we're going 4 times a week. So everybody has shows coming up, and I want them to make sure that they're ready for the other promoters and for myself. And this week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm opening it up for several vets who have been with my company as well, so they can get their ring rest out and help on their cardio as well.
And they'll have to go through all the health screenings before they can start training again.
That's right.
You're still active as a wrestler, or have you retired officially?
Hell, well, I won't say, but,
Semi, then.
Hulk Hogan retired, Flair retired. They all had matches come back. To be honest with you, I think I've retired 3 times and came back. But I don't know. I might have one more match in me. Do I have the itch to come back? No, I don't.
You got a long way to go before you catch up to Terry Funk.
Yeah, he's got, 17 retirements? That's good for him.
3 dozen? I don't know. I've lost count.
Everybody, in this business, you never say never. So, and it's true. You have that in your blood, just like Hep C. And unfortunately, it's in you till the day you die. So, do I have one more in me? Probably. Do I want one more? No.
Did you go as far as you thought you would go on the national scene, or what had to line up differently for you to move out of the prelims in WWE and AWA? Either one.
I had the opportunity to get a push in the WWE when we were doing TV for them. Slick, he was around the area when myself and the Brooklyn Brawler were talking. And I put on one of his jerseys and a baseball cap that I always wear, just like this one. And he goes, hey, you know what? You guys would be a good team. We'll call you guys the Louisville Sluggers. And the office thought about it for a little bit, and it was shot down. So that was my only real opportunity about getting in. I really don't care. I knew what my job was to do, and I had no problem with it. And I made a lot of good friends along the way, like Kurt Hennig, Ted DiBiase. I had a match with Andre the Giant and Haku, but no, I don't, Greg Gagne, I had no problems with them either. So Marty Jannetty, Shawn Michaels, my God, Greg the Hammer Valentine, they go on and on. I talk to a lot of those guys all the time, the ones who are still with us, but I don't have any regrets that I didn't go any further. No.
Well, and you went quite a distance as on the Wisconsin wrestling scene.
Yeah. Being on TV had a little bit of a push for me, like in the Midwest, because I was getting a lot of bookings for that in Illinois and Indiana. I was even out in Ohio, Michigan, places like that, and along with Wisconsin. So it helps. Currently, right now, I have about 15 sponsors who sponsor my shows, and it's all because I was on TV back in the day. So it helps, without a doubt.
Frankie DeFalco, thanks for coming on. I believe a lot of promoters, wrestlers, and fans need to have an idea of what to expect as the other states start allowing live events again and raise the attendance caps. Unfortunately, my home state of Illinois doesn't look like, it's looking a lot like we're going to be the very last holdout where we're not going to reopen until there's a vaccine created.
Well, that's what I heard about. I heard that about WWE also, that they're not going to run any more house shows until a vaccine is created and working. So they're saving a lot of money with travel, all over the country and, of course, overseas. So, what they have going for them is probably just going to be the PC for a little bit until something happens on the vaccine side.
After the interview, I learned Illinois will have its first sanctioned wrestling event on June the 20th, the same day as Brew City. PWCI Entertainment will be holding an outdoor event in Wonder Lake, Illinois at the Alibi Pub and Grill at 4117 Wonder Lake Road at 4 p.m., which is in McHenry County towards the Wisconsin border. Social distancing will be enforced and guidelines followed. I had a lot more written up, but I'll have to save it for next week as we are out of time for Crimey Coast to Coast on PWCI this week. Rants go quick. Until next time, the spin is making me dizzy.